over this. And then, of course, Chris, the question then will become, what sort of expedited process will they see at this jail? It can take some 12 hours for somebody to get booked in, processed, bailed out. Certainly safe to say that the former president will not see that sort of a wait inside. So we're also asking those questions in terms of what will it look like when they surrender later this week, Chris.
Important unanswered questions, Blaine. Thank you so much for that. So, Glenn, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is reporting this, quote, lawyers for those charged will be meeting with Willis, DA Fani Willis, and her staff this week to negotiate bond and other terms of surrender. That sounds pretty straightforward to me, but what does that look like typically, and will it look like that here?
Yeah, so usually it's a pretty basic proposition when somebody is booked, they're arrested, they're fingerprinted, they have their arrest photo taken, they're shortly thereafter presented to the court for their arraignment, which is just giving them formal notice of the charges, giving them an opportunity to enter a plea. It's almost always not guilty, discussing conditions of release, and then setting a next court appearance for each defendant. It may be a consolidated court appearance where all 19 will appear together. Some people ask, well, how does a prosecutor go about trying, that is conducting the trial for 19 defendants? And, you know, we've had that happen in the courts of Washington, D.C. I had a case where we indicted more than 24 defendants in a RICO case. Ultimately, all pled guilty except 13 of them. So how did we take 13 people to trial? We had to break it up into 3 separate trials. We tried 6 defendants in one trial, 6 defendants in the second trial, and then 1 lone defendant in the third RICO trial in that series of trials. So we may see Fani Willis sort of parceling up the defendants and proposing a prompt trial for one batch of defendants with other trials to follow. That's one way to deal with a 19 co-defendant case.
So we also know, Glenn, that Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows' legal team, filed a motion trying to get these charges against him dismissed. Their argument essentially that he was working for the federal government at the time. This was part of his job. Can that work?
It can work in theory. I don't think it will work here because I think Mark Meadows' attorneys will be hard-pressed to convince the federal judge who's hearing the removal motion that going down to states after elections are conducted and involving yourself in recounts and arguably, as the indictment sets out, committing a series of crimes as part of a conspiracy to overturn the results of a presidential election in a particular state. Somehow that's all part of the official duties of a chief of staff. I don't think we've ever seen any other chief of staff to the president engage in that kind of conduct, and I don't think a judge will buy that all of that was part of Mark Meadows' official duties as chief of staff to the president of the United States.
Glenn Kirshner, thanks so much, Glenn. Appreciate it. And up next, a rare and unlikely session, frankly, of the Tennessee legislature getting underway in just a few hours. How gun reform is driving the Republican-led debate. Plus, in our next hour, as places in California deal with more than a year's worth of rain in a single day, how the governor's office is working to try to keep people safe. You're watching Chris Jancy Reports, only on MSNBC.
A drought and now rainfall like we haven't seen in a century. Can you help people understand how that swing is, that pendulum swing, as it were, is difficult for the ecosystems just to handle?
Well, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head here in terms of what we expect one of the greatest challenges to be in a warming climate in California and in some other places around the world too. We call it increasing precipitation whiplash or increasing hydroclimate whiplash. And really what it means are that we're likely to see increasingly wide swings between very wet conditions and floods on the one hand, but also, yes, very dry conditions and droughts on the other. And all of this has to come down to a pretty fundamental physical principle, the water vapor holding capacity of the atmosphere, which increases exponentially in a warming climate. So that raises the ceiling not only on how intense precipitation can become, but also the ceiling on how intense evaporation can become. In other words, how thirsty the atmosphere is, how quickly it draws water out of the soil, out of vegetation, out of the landscape. And so by that same fundamental mechanism, you actually can expect more intense extremes both on the wet and dry sides of the spectrum in places like California, which really is going to be a challenge for ecosystems and water infrastructure alike.
Yeah, that answer you just gave helped me understand a little bit. I think whiplash is the word. You struck on it. Those swings are just remarkable. Daniel Swain, thanks so much for helping.